And we're live. Hey, everybody. It's First Draft Friday. This is our second edition, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm Alessandra Torre. I'm with Authors AI. I'm here with Lou, Aronica. Lou, did I pronounce your last name right? Is that correct?
Close enough. Aronica, yes.
What is right?
It is right.
Is it Aronica? It is right. Okay, great. Aronica. Lou is from The Story Plant. He is an editor. He's a New York Times bestselling author. So we're really excited to have him here. I'm going to have him introduce himself in a moment. But before we begin, I just want to say welcome, everyone. Welcome to all of our live watchers and to everyone who will watch the replay. Please shout out in the comment section the hello so we can see if we are able to get your comments. And if you want to add your information to StreamYard, then it will also display your photo. Normally, a lot of times it just says to us Facebook user, so we can't see who you are. But today it's going to be all about characters. So we're going to be talking how to develop great characters, tips for developing great characters, and having them consistent and strong in your novels. So we're talking about fiction, and Authors AI is based on fiction, though we welcome any nonfiction writers to jump on in. And we got some comments coming in. So yeah, great. Hey guys, it's great to have you. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Lou. Lou, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your history and
Sure.
and what you do?
Well, I'm Lou. The last name's pronounced Aronica, just the way Alessandra pronounced it. I've been in the book business for a really, really, really long time. I was deputy publisher of Bantam Books, then I was publisher of Berkeley Books, then I was publisher of Avon Books, and then I moved away from that, planning to focus on a writing career, and found that I just loved publishing too much to completely walk away from it. And so agent Peter Miller and I created the Story Plant back in 2007. And we're an independent publisher. We publish about 25 new titles a year, almost entirely fiction. We've published a couple of nonfiction books. We actually have a couple more on the list for 2021. But our real focus and my deep love is for fiction. And specifically, this is the thing. Every book publisher and book editor gets the question, what are you looking for? And to me, that's an incredibly silly question, because if you are actually looking for a specific thing, in the moment that you're having the conversation with that person, there is an overwhelmingly good chance that that's not the thing that you're going to want by the time you get it. But the one thing that is overwhelmingly true, consistently true, 100% of the time, is for me that I love books with great characters. Characters are the thing that, to me, what characters do for a novel is build an emotional bond between the reader and the story. And great characters can carry you through terrible plots overwhelmingly more than a great plot can carry you through terrible characters. And so, it's something that I focus on a great deal in my own writing, and something that I implore every writer to concentrate on as much as they possibly can.
That's so interesting, and I love that background. I didn't realize that you had worked with traditional publishers, and so you were an editor at a traditional publishing house. So you acquired.
I was the publisher. I was deputy publisher at Bantam and ran their mass market program. And then when I was at Berkeley and Avon, I was publisher. So all of editorial and marketing and publicity and all of that reported to me.
So if you got a manuscript in that had, I guess my first question would be, when manuscripts would come in that had character issues, I don't mean like the characters had issues, like there was a problem with the characters. So what were those problems typically, and what is a fixable problem in your mind as a publisher versus an unfixable problem? Or are all character issues fixable?
Well, I think depending on the talent of the writer, all problems are fixable. But the the two biggest problems were just lack of attention to characters at all, so that the author was looking at the characters purely as vehicles. You know, mm-hmm. This is somebody I need to do this action, or this is somebody I need to say these words. Not thinking about the characters as people and putting them in the context of human emotion. That's the first substantial problem that you get with books with lousy characters. The other thing is writers writing to a type. You know, so rather than feeling the character and making the character feel nuanced and three-dimensional, they're writing their action hero using action hero phrases, or they're writing their romantic lead, right, using romantic lead phrases, and they're not really making them come alive in any way. And readers can feel it even when they're not aware of it. I mean, I think one of the things that we always have to be, you know, really conscious of as writers is that most readers will be completely unaware of why they're not connecting with a story, but
right.
These are critical.
They know
right, and so yeah, so maybe only a tenth of the people who turn away might say, "Well, I didn't like it because I didn't like the characters," but probably 90% of the people who turn away didn't like it because they didn't like the characters, or didn't feel like the characters were real in any way. Now that is fixable. It's very fixable. I mean, there are techniques that you can use. The level to which you're able to fix it depends on one's ability as a writer, which is true with everything else with writing.
That's so true. And I bet if you asked yourself, like a reader, the last 5 books that I didn't like, you know, like, did you connect with those characters? And I love what you just said about, you know, one of the issues being them just kind of plugging in like a cookie cutter mold. Because I think my world is mostly romance. I write suspense and romance. But with a lot of romance books that I read, it is just sort of like, they were like, okay, I need an alpha male who makes a lot of money, and boom, here it is. And that lead character is pretty much indiscernible from every other lead character that author has ever written. You know, they just put a different name on it, and it's a new character. But I do think that's really important. And let's say that you do have an author who has a very cookie cutter type character, do they need to go back to the drawing board? Do you have any tips that they could use to humanize that character and make them unique?
Yeah, I mean, if you're working at the manuscript stage, so somebody's written a complete manuscript, and the characters are awful, there are things that you can do at that stage in terms of asking questions about motivation. You know, what matters to this character? You know, why is this person doing the things they're doing? Not from a plot perspective, but from an emotional perspective. You know, I mean, one of the huge problems in a lot of thrillers, for example, is that the villains are one-dimensional. And often, you know, they're doing the thing because of greed. They're doing the thing because of power. You know, that sort of thing. And it's like, you know what? I would guess that overwhelmingly most bad guys think they're good guys, and if they think they're good guys, then what is it that they believe in that is driving them through this to commit these acts? You can ask, once you're at the finished manuscript stage, you can still ask yourself those kinds of questions and revise, accordingly. At the beginning stage, when you're starting, there's a whole suite of things that you can do to make sure you just never get to that place. And that's the whole, right. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole intimacy thing. I've got a my whole feeling is that you should have an intimate relationship with your characters. In that you should know them the way you know your friends and family. Literally the way you know your friends and family, not like as well as you know your friends and family, but you know your friends and family because of what their their desires and their dreams are, and what their preferences are, and you can guess how they're going to react in any situation and that sort of thing. You know, people that you really know well, you know that way. And you should know any significant character that you have in any story that you write, you should know that well, in that way. So that when you're there and you're at a moment in the story where the character has to decide something, do something, just walk through the room, they're going to do it the way they would do it. And so, what the thing that I suggest to writers to do most is to ask themselves a million questions, 24 questions about their characters that have absolutely nothing to do with the story, and that will never have anything to do with the story. So, because I think when you know where your main character or where your tertiary character would go on vacation, or what they would pick up if they were in the ice cream section in a supermarket, tells you so much about that character and gives you such an intense connection to that character that it becomes super easy for you to just write the character, because it should never be visible on the page. There should never be a point where a savvy reader is saying, "Oh, this is character development." It should never happen that way. It should be completely organic, and the only way it can be completely organic is if you really do the work up front. So it is harder to go back and revise that way.
I think it's way harder because, like you said, it's not just like the pivotal moments in the story. It's walking in a room. Like, it's every interaction that character makes with every other person in every scenario and every line of dialogue. It's and if you do that homework from the very beginning, before you ever, I teach like classes in writing, and I have all this stuff they have to do prior to writing. They're so anxious, they're so anxious to start writing. Like, they don't want to do all this stuff.
And start playing.
Yeah, but like, let's just write already. But the more homework you can do early, like before you ever start writing, then the more consistent you can be and everything else. And I love what you said about the every villain has, they think they're a hero, or they think that they're justified or whatever. And that some of the best books or movies, if somebody watches movies, is that where you're rooting, like you're torn because you're kind of rooting for the bad guy also, because see his or her, you can see their side and you can understand and you can feel their emotions when they fail.
Yeah, well, I mean, I felt that way about Black Panther. Was amazing in that regard, because it was the first time I saw a superhero movie operate that way, where I did not want the villain to lose, because he had he was making a lot of really good points.
Yeah.
And I think when you cause your reader to care that much, that you've won.
Then you've done your job. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, the plot, even great characters can make up for a lot of other issues in your book if they really, love or hate that character. The same way, like if you really hate a character, you might really hate that character, but you're going to keep reading to find out, what ends up happening. You don't like the ending, like you can't walk away from that character because they're so horrible. Like, something has to happen.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Some of my favorite novels, I'm not sure I could tell you the plot of the story anymore, but I can still tell you things about the characters and what I felt, what I was experiencing when I was reading it because of those characters. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm actually particularly bad about recommending books because of that, because I tend to love books that where the character evolution is the cool thing. It's so
Yeah, I'm the same way. I was trying to think of like examples of great characters or great. It was much easier. I was recently talking with someone about plot-based stories versus character-based, and a lot of people. And so I could come up with all these character-based stories, and then I was trying to think of great plot-based stories. but the best plot-based stories had great characters. Like they were almost like, I was like, well, it's plot-based, but you know, it would not be the same without that character, you know, that great character.
Right. Yeah. The one exception to that I can name is the Da Vinci Code, where it's possibly the only book I can recall where the characters are horrendously bad. I mean, just horribly, horribly bad. But I sped through the novel because the story was so good. But
I haven't read.
I mean, talking about cookie cutter characters.
Yeah, I haven't read that book. I've only seen the movie, but I know when I watched the other movies, I was like, well, what happened to the girl, like, from the first movie, you know? Because it was like, they would just swap in, like, another, you know, female was just, like, interchangeable and whatever. Like, we need someone.
And it's a funny thing. I mean, because I would think it would be tough to be able to be so great at one thing and so dreadful at another, you know, a decent skill, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's a good example. I should read the Da Vinci Code. I'm always trying to read. And my time for reading is just so horrible. But that's there's another question I was going to ask when you. Oh, I know what it was. So one thing I struggle with, and I see a lot of writers struggle with, is it's really easy to write characters that are like us, right? Like, we know how we think, we know how we speak, we know how we would react in certain situations, but that's not really what, you know, you want to create diverse characters, and you want every book different. So if I'm writing a character that's just so completely opposite me, are there any tips that you have for really getting inside their head? And I'm putting you on the spot with this, but getting inside their head and having their authentic voice.
Well, I think it goes back to that same kind of homework, you know, where if you're really imagining that character in a three-dimensional way, and again, I believe very strongly in this tool of applying or learning the answers to questions that have absolutely nothing to do with the story. Because that really allows you into the heads of people who are nothing like you at all. In fact, in some ways, it's easier to do it with people who aren't like you at all. Because I think it's a mistake. And I think, you know, this is an incredibly appropriate moment to be having this conversation. But it is always a mistake to try to presume that you can put yourself in the shoes of somebody whose life is completely different from your own. However, as writers, there are, you know, we share, all human beings share more things than the things that differentiate them. And I think that your job as a writer, writing about people who aren't like you, is to connect up with those common things. You know, we all go through our lives in relatively similar ways. Our circumstances could be overwhelmingly different, but it's a little easier to research the circumstances if you're making the people who are populating those circumstances real. If you get to know them really, really well. So I think, I think some of it is, I think a lot of it is just about understanding and just trying to see what the key human things are to every character you have in your story. And then the rest, I think, is just painting in the situation.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think that, what you just said was really powerful about, you know, I could be very different from this character and her views and her experiences, or his views. And for me, I struggle a lot with writing male point of view. But you and I have similarities between us, whether we know it or not, you know, and I can relate or connect with something in that character. and then the rest. And I think it helps. I always try. It's easiest for me if I have a muse, and if that muse is someone that I know.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times my characters are my uncle, or my best friend from college or something like that. That I know how she would react in the situation. I know the type of inappropriate comment she would make, or that sort of thing. So that makes I have her voice in my head when I'm writing, and that always.
It's a tremendously valuable tool. Caroline Levitt, who's a brilliant novelist, and also teaches the UCLA extension program for creative writing. I interviewed her for a book a number of years ago, and she said that she actually researches photos of her characters, so that when she's writing, she has these photos of these people on her wall that she can refer to, because the act of finding the person who's the perfect face for that character is a tremendous amount of character work right there.
Yeah,
I'm developing characters. So, yeah, she takes it very seriously.
Well, I think any good writer does. I think, and it's something I think we learn, because I feel like I completely kind of ignored what you said early on about authors just use them as a device for the plot. I think it took me a long time to realize how important they were, because the same thing, like you read a book and you don't realize that and also the more you write, we have a lot of new authors, the more you write, it completely changes how you read a book, because suddenly you're paying attention to so much more. It has almost ruined reading for me, honestly, because I'm so critical and I'm so,
Well, it's a funny. My wife and I have this conversation all the time, because she has to finish every book she starts, and as a publisher, finish every book I started. I'd be way behind on my work at this point. But the whole idea that that yes, somebody put in, spent a year and a half writing this, and you're giving them 18 pages or something like that. It has stopped me from really, totally investing myself, because I am always looking at, I think this might have been a better choice here, or that sort of thing. It's also completely slowed down my writing, that because it's very, when I'm reading fiction, certainly I can't read it fast, because I've taught myself to read it slowly. Because as a critic, I've got it. And so I can't breeze through anything.
Yeah, I have no issue. I have a lot of friends same way. Like, they start a book, they have to finish it, and I have books full of books, and I might have read 10% of them through. Sometimes I stop in 5 pages, and sometimes I'll stop 80% through if I'm like, I'm not emotionally invested.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Life's too short, right? Life's too short. At some point, I'll go, why am I reading this book?
Right.
Like,
almost anything would be better.
The characters are horrible. I don't really care what happens to anybody. So I'll stop. But I was looking to see if we have any questions. If anyone has any questions, let me know. Someone said they struggle with secondary characters. Like, how much development to do? Now, in your opinion, can secondary characters be used as a plot device, or do they need to be
tertiary characters? I don't think anybody who's got a lot of time on the page should be glossed over. Yeah, I really don't. I think it adds so much to the richness of the story if all of the characters with whom the main characters are interacting are also real characters. Sure, if somebody's walking into a scene for 3 pages or something like that, knock yourself out. But, right. But I do think, and it does make an enormous difference if you can, if for 2 reasons. One, because it just makes the whole experience better, but it also helps develop the main characters. Because if you develop your secondary characters really well, your main character's reaction to those secondary characters are going to be different from one another, which helps develop your main character. Your because I'm going to deal with, I'm going to deal with you differently than I'm going to deal with my neighbor. And if I know you in the novel and I know my neighbor in the novel, how I deal with those people says something about me as a character. So it's actually not, it's useful both in terms of making the story better and making the experience richer, but also in terms of making the main characters more three-dimensional.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it can be a great way of adding, like you said, another dimension, but also, no, I lost my train of thought with that. I had something brilliant to say, but so we're going to pretend like it was great. Yeah, and someone said, that a lot of their secondary characters end up with their own book. And this is really common in romance. And this is something a lot of times when I'm reading a book, I'm like, oh, this author's setting up, there's no reason that Jennifer has been so prominent in this book. She really has no purpose in this book, but she's in every other scene. And then sure enough, Jennifer, at the end of the book, Jennifer has a pre-order for her own book. But I'm not saying, Kate, that that's a bad thing, because a lot of sequels are built off great secondary characters that the readers are just, man, like I want more of that, and I want to see what goes on with that. And I think I'm not really sure of other genres that do that, like romance does. Is that really just a romance thing?
It's way more of a romance thing, but I actually working with a story plan author now who had introduced. He's a thriller writer, and he had introduced an interesting tertiary character into one of his plots, and she kind of chewed up the scenery. She was just so powerful as a character that then he sort of, the next book, he gave her a little more attention. There were more reasons for her to be in the story, and by his next novel, she was the feature character, and now he's working on a sequel with that character. It was a total surprise to him. He happens to be somebody who writes fantastic characters, so it kind of happens a lot with him where somebody comes into the scene and dominates.
Yeah.
But in this case, it just she just took away the story. And so it does happen. But yeah, I think it happens more in romance than it does anyplace else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. And it's not a bad, a lot of people talk about formulaic writing, formulaic plot, and romance gets criticized more than anyone. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is you can have, I don't want to say a formulaic plot, but you can tell the same story so many different ways based on the characters that are living in that. Yeah. And that's how a lot of authors are like, oh, I'm worried because I'm reading a book and the plot's kind of similar to my book. And, there's only so many stories out there for us to tell, but every story is in a different voice and has different, actions and scenes, and characters are really that one thing that can, like, you can follow the exact same outline, but one character can make that shine, another one can make it.
Yeah. And I think the reality is there really are only a handful of stories, but there are an endless number of human nuances. And as long as you're doing that.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to see if we have any questions. So I can look through. Yeah, everybody's. We have some great comments, but there aren't any questions. So and we're already at the already at so that was fast. We are going to be drawing a winner for a free ticket to Inkers Con, which is an authors conference, online authors conference. I thought that I'd be able to see all the entries here, but the way that our broadcast is, it isn't. So I will post that in the comment section when we look at the email entries and the comments. So congratulations to one of you. I'm going to post it just in a couple minutes. So just if you want to stick around, and of course we'll also contact you by email or through Facebook Messenger. But I want to thank you so much, Lou, for being here. Pleasure. And for our second First Draft Friday. This was a great conversation, and makes me want to go back to the drawing board. I'm 40 a book right now, and I have too big of a cast of characters. I'm starting to be like, because I think I'm juggling 5 or 6 characters because you know.
Yeah, I love that. I know there are readers who don't, but I actually love it. I love stories with enormous casts.
Yeah, well, I have to keep them all. Like if there's only 3, it's easy to know who the bad guy is, right? So like one of these 3 people. So that's where I am right now. But and someone quick question from the readers. Someone said, how do you not get influenced by real life events or people, or is it okay to do so?
Totally. I think you have to. You have to.
Right?
Yeah, I think you absolutely have to.
Friends, right? They're all on the pages somewhere.
Yeah, no. I think it's actually critical. I mean, look, we've been having this conversation over and over. Recently, how much, how much, coronavirus has to be in my next novel.
I'm pretending like it doesn't exist altogether. Like, yeah.
I think it was funny because a writer I was talking to recently said, if you were writing a book set in 1945, you had to talk about World War II, and my response to that was not if it's not about, not if the circumstances aren't about that in any way. People weren't only thinking about World War II in 1945. And even in the middle of this, we're not always thinking about the coronavirus right now. It would be a disservice to the reading community if every book that came out next year was a virus. Talk about the virus in some way. Yeah,
you're 100% right. And the way publishing timelines are, like the book I'm writing now isn't going to come out until summer of next year.
Sure.
So who knows what situation we could be in then. And the problem is you often date your, I'm not going to try to go on a rampage, but you often date yourself with those things also, because
right.
If you do put everyone in mask and the book's 5 years old, someone's reading it and they're like, I'm hoping that we're not in mask in 5 years, and someone can read it and like, gosh, this is, I remember I read I think it was a Jackie Collins book, and the character was going on and on about this new car she bought. It was $30,000, which I think was supposed to be a really expensive car. It was like in the 80s or something. And so, but ever since that day, I will never mention if I can avoid a price point, if I can avoid like using the word iPhone or something like that, or social media. Because it's like, Twitter might mean absolutely nothing to someone 6 years from now.
I think it's really, now if it is germane to the story, then you're actually doing a disservice not to include it. But if it's not germane to the story, I think you just set it aside.
Yeah, when you can. All right, well, thank you so much, Lou. I appreciate it. And this is Authors AI. This is First Draft Friday. If you aren't familiar with Authors AI, please swing by our website, authors.ai. We have a super cool fiction-loving artificial intelligence that can read your muse.
I'm a big fan.
And give you her feedback on it. So please swing by and check us out. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks. So RSVP for that one. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.